En este capítulo le vamos a dar continuidad a la conversación que tuvimos con la gente de Franklin Pierce Law School acerca de la oferta educativa de esta universidad y cómo nosotros como mexicanos podemos acceder a diferentes programas.
Súper interesante las dos partes, práctica y teórica, que te ofrece Franklin Pierce.
Bienvenidos a este episodio de Abogacía Trabajando, hablando con propiedad intelectual. La idea de este episodio es darle continuidad a la plática que tuvimos la semana antepasada con Megan y Miki acerca de las ofertas educativas que tiene Franklin Pierce Law School. Particularmente nos interesa que en este capítulo podamos dar una explicación más práctica de cómo acercarse a la universidad, de si escucharon la primera edición y les pareció una alternativa interesante para obtener un grado de Estados Unidos sin tener que cambiarse de país, sin tener que dejar sus trabajos. Lo que nos interesa es que ustedes encuentren aquí en este segundo episodio la manera de poder acceder a estas ofertas educativas y poder conocer un poquito más de lo que Franklin Pierce les puede ofrecer.
Y profundizar justamente en los programas que tienen, ¿no? Entonces, bueno, lo tomamos donde lo dejamos.
Donde lo dejamos. Thank you Megan, thank you Miki. At the end of our last episode, I literally rushed you to talk about the Intellectual Property Summer Institute, but we have time now, so if you could kind of explain what it is, what it offers, and how we can get there.
Sure, yeah. So the Intellectual Property Summer Institute, which we call IPSI, has been around for over 30 years, and it has drawn from practitioners and students from all over the world, where we go much deeper into different areas of intellectual property. And it probably is a good time to just talk about what we mean by intellectual property. So traditionally, it has been patents and trademarks, copyrights, and trade secrets. And that is still the core of the offerings or things around those topics. However, the breadth of intellectual property has really transformed over the last decade or so and has incorporated issues such as data and data privacy, competition law and antitrust, and areas such as that are intertwined with patent and copyright types of issues. One of the speakers that we had was the general counsel of TikTok, and he explained in a way that what he explains to the internal TikTok engineers is that data is their most valuable asset. It is their intellectual property, the data from the users themselves. So they recognize it as an intellectual property asset and need to treat it as such. What they can and can't do with it is different all over the world.
Right.
Not just country to country, but within a country, state to state or province to province, it changes. We had a speaker, the general counsel, Horacio Gutierrez from Spotify, who talked about the complexity of copyrights and the rights that one has to have in music and performing from all over the world. So we dive into topics such as that. We also bring together areas of practice and how different intellectual property rights tie into a given area of practice, whether that's pharmaceutical or fashion or entertainment or the metaverse or blockchain and cryptocurrencies. All of these, sort of newer areas that are converging multiple areas of technology and multiple areas of the law. In addition to that, we go deeper dives into the traditional areas, whether it's patents or trademarks and trade secrets, into the initial courses and deeper courses and even deeper courses from there. So the Summer Institute covers an array of these, and students have a very flexible opportunity to either take online courses or in-person courses. And the online courses are either 3 or 6 weeks long, and there are many courses offered. So if a student wanted to take 1 or 2 courses, they could. If they wanted to take a full slate of 5 or 6 classes, they can. And similarly, we have an in-person portion that's 2 weeks long in Concord, New Hampshire. So people come in from all over, and we do deep dive topics in a 2-week session, which has the added benefit of having the networking aspects of it and a lot of social aspects that you can do when you're in person.
So like you go to New Hampshire for 2 weeks?
For 2 weeks.
I'm packing already. And then you get like sessions on specific topics of IP as you have explained, which is broader than we maybe studied a few years ago. And then you just go back home to work and got the amazing experience of course, the academic materials, but
Right.
also the networking and the experience of living in campus, sort of.
And it's
Exactly.
two components. So you could get academic credit for it and count those credits toward a master's degree or, toward a JD. Alternatively, you can just come if it's a new area of practice. I mean, you may be an attorney thinking, okay, we're seeing more issues about blockchain coming up. I'd like to really be, kind of an expert in, get a quick, an intensive experience learning about that so that you can then come back and add value to your firm. And so it enables that kind of upskilling at the same time. So either for academic credit or just sort of for practical legal training.
Right, which we recognize as a certificate or a diploma, depending upon what country you're from. They may be called different things, but then they get some recognition of having achieved that as well.
I was thinking when Mickey was talking about kind of the breadth of IP issues that we deal with in IPSI, he and I team teach an intellectual property kind of introductory course. And that takes place over the course of 4 days. And we're getting ready to teach that soon. But we always struggle with, we want to incorporate, we come from sort of two different, sort of areas of expertise within IP. But, as we kind of come together and figure out what we're going to cover, I think that introductory class could probably last, for
The 2 weeks.
full year. Yeah,
Exactly.
exactly. Yeah.
And it's really interesting that you mentioned Spotify, you mentioned another company, and TikTok. Yeah, you're right. Because for us, I think it's appealing to have like practitioners, head of IP for different multinational companies, like teaching like the new stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I remember we were discussing a few days ago about the session that you had in Silicon Valley. That for us is, Silicon Valley is where technology is based in the US, right? So can you tell us more about the experience in Silicon Valley? Who was there?
Yeah, and actually, this is probably one of the reasons why I'm making the transition from corporate practice to legal education is a recognition of what I'm doing every day at my job at Microsoft and what my formal legal education was 25 years ago has changed dramatically over that period of time. And so the class that we've done, and we've repeated a few times now, is a IP strategies class in Silicon Valley. And what we do is we bring in leaders of intellectual property from Silicon Valley companies who explain how they use different forms of intellectual property to advance their business goals. And then we also review like recent court battles that they may have had with other companies that now they can fully talk about and explore their strategies behind it. So we've had speakers from Google and Facebook and Microsoft and Dolby and Uber and all sorts of companies like that.
Apple was there, right?
Yeah, and I'll give you one example more specifically about that. So there was a large patent dispute in the cellular phone space between Apple and Samsung some years ago involving the Samsung Galaxy and the iPhones and whether or not it was copied. And there were copyright issues, there were trademark issues, there were trade dress issues, and there were patent issues. And so we sort of explored those, one from the legal case point of view, secondly from what was Apple's strategy, Steve Jobs leading it at the time, what was Samsung strategies with J.Y. Lee leading it at the time, and sort of explored with that.
My favorite part was where you divided up the class. You had different teams sort of representing different components, and you had the Apple team over here and the Samsung team over, and then you gave them negotiation terms.
They did.
And they were sort of asked to negotiate, which was such an incredible experience.
Yeah, so everybody with an iPhone was on one side of this, and everybody with an Android phone was on the other side, right? And so we had that negotiation go, and but then afterwards we brought in the Chief Patent Counsel from Apple, who talked about what their strategy was at that time. And then we brought in the Chief Patent Counsel from Samsung, who talked about their strategy at that time and where things have landed today. And we continue to do that where the disputes are. There was a major trade secret case between Google, which Waymo, the self-driving unit, and Uber. And we did the same thing there. We had the talk and then the Google person and then the Uber person talk. And we continue to do that to show very recent activities that are going on. There's a current dispute going on between Ericsson and Apple, and that will be part of our patent litigation course in October.
There's nothing more practical than that, right?
Right, because that's a good thing. Like you have the students look into the case, kind of figure what they would do, and then at the end you get the people who actually did the negotiation.
Yeah.
Let them know why they did something or how it came out.
Yes.
And what was their line of thinking, not just from the legal perspective, but also from the business perspective, because at the end, well, we are all trying to carry on a business.
There's a business objective to every legal dispute,
Right.
And that's the heart of the strategies class to get to. But there's also the practical realities of how did these things work and how do we do it. So, for example, in the class that we're having in patent litigation in October, we're going to a courtroom in the Eastern District of Texas and watching what's called a Markman hearing, an actual hearing where the claims of a patent are going to be discussed live. And then the judge is going to talk to the students right after that case.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yes, that's great. I think that with that, we talked about last episode about the JD hybrid program. We already discussed about IPSI. But what about the Master of Law that I think is more traditional and is what people have been doing in Franklin Pierce so far?
Yes, we've had, for decades now, we've had a master's and an LLM in intellectual property and commerce and technology that you were a part of not too long ago. And that program is either a residential program or an online program. And you can really customize it. It's not, you can focus if your primary interest is in patents and patent prosecution, we have those course offerings. If it's, trademarks or entrepreneurship and innovation or technology transfer and development, we have all kinds of different sort of, topics within and classes that people can take within that master's degree. And then, they can do it residentially or online, but then the students are also able, if you are, an attorney from another country, then we will also help you prepare for the bar exam if you want to take the bar exam in states that will permit that. We have a whole system set up to help give you that kind of one-on-one academic support to help you not just advance your IP education, but also to prepare for that exam, which is a pretty intensive exam kind of at the end. We also offer career services advice. So we have our career services office has someone dedicated to our master's students that kind of help you navigate the pieces of your career and what you would want to do next. There's there's an option for OPT, which is the opportunity to actually work after you graduate. You could work in the United States under your student visa for up to a year under certain conditions. And so there are all kinds of practical experiences that students can have as part of that master's program. Tell me a little bit about your experience. What was it like when you were there?
Yeah, it was great. So I was in the residential program. Mm-hmm. So I remember that I graduated and something that I have to say is it's a life experience because being there, talking with people from different countries, it is definitely something that I appreciate. And when I ended the program, I had a chance to take the optional practical training, the OPT. And I remember career services helped me a lot, interviewing with different law firms. I remember I applied Ladas and Paris, for instance, in New York, and a few more others. But I ended at Prince Gilson and Leon, now Crowell & Moring in Chicago. And it was great because I was able to practice what I learned in the US. So when I went there and I was in Chicago, I remember I was preparing for documentation, for discovery period. I remember helping in legal research. You had a really good class for legal research, graduate legal research, I think it's the name. And also drafting memos. Mm-hmm. What else? Filing US applications, following them. At that time, I think that my main clients were American Airlines, Amway, among others. Also, I was dealing with some international law firms. I was also talking with Mexican law firms. Speaking Spanish is always helpful. So yeah, it was really something that I learned a lot. I learned the way an American law firm work, billing hours, filling your timesheets, all that. So yeah, this is something definitely that I couldn't have done without Franklin Pierce.
We have these two sort of clinical opportunities even within the school that give students the opportunity to practice. And we have, a lot of our master's students just choose to do that. One is the intellectual property transaction clinic, where students are representing clients who are starting businesses or have particular IP issues that come up. There's a whole spectrum of issues, and students are actually working directly with those clients throughout the time that they're at Franklin Pierce. We also have the International Technology Transfer Institute, and that's headed by Professor Stan Kowalski. And Stan Kowalski works with the U.S. Department of Commerce, WIPO, the World Health Organization, and really tries to help countries that are sort of emerging from an industrial economy to an innovation economy, sort of helping with that transition. And so he has gotten students on the ground working with people in Sri Lanka and Armenia and Algeria, just on these really phenomenal projects while they're in school. And it's also, you think in New Hampshire, it's really cool to see so many international students coming, not just from Latin America, but over the last year, we were having, celebrating international holidays of the Philippines and Vietnam and Thailand and
India.
And India, yes.
Yeah.
We had
You
a
have
great
celebrations
Diwali
all year long.
celebration. It is a constant party.
One thing I want to emphasize on something that you just said with your experience as well, there's a practical realities of supply and demand in the job markets. And I think students here in Mexico have a unique opportunity right now with a U.S. credential in particular, with multinational companies and being bilingual. I can say at this time, large companies can't hire fast enough people who are bilingual between Spanish and English and to have a U.S. credential degree to be able to practice in their multinational companies. So I think there's a unique opportunity in time, right? These are things that maybe 10 or 15 years ago may not have been as strong as demand as they are today, but today there's a very strong demand.
And now you're mentioning something that's very, very interesting, and we were also talking about it yesterday. Many years ago, it seemed kind of difficult to vision yourself living somewhere other than in your country.
Right.
Like maybe in the U.S. it's more common to move. Like you may
Correct.
be born in New York and then you end up going to college in Seattle and then you go to work to California. But for instance, in Mexico, it's not that common. Like you were born in Mexico City and you would do the whole thing in Mexico City. But nowadays, it is so realistic to have the opportunity of working for an international company. It's so real, the possibility of moving to study or work abroad, that as you mentioned, having the bilingual status plus a U.S. credential definitely puts you, I would say, like in the top of the list of candidates.
Yes, and I think the flexibility now, especially post-pandemic, where companies have become much more flexible, that for those who want to move and be in the headquarters or be in a particular city, they can. For those who want to remain in whatever city they're in for their personal reasons, they can do that too. So I think the atmosphere has changed a bit in that as well, and giving the flexibility back to the employee. Really.
Right.
Yeah.
Now that you were talking about the practices, it's OPC?
OPT.
OPT. I was wondering, if you apply for an online program, are you still able to apply to that OPC programs as well, or not? You have to be on the in-person program, right?
It's part of a student visa, so this is where outside of my expertise, so I'm going to have to defer to the lawyers who do do that work for us. But it's my understanding that it's really part of the visa program. So if you have a student visa that's a residential student visa, it deals with enabling you to stay far longer in the United States and for the practical training.
I think the longest that you can be there is for 1 year for OPT. So you can be for 3 months, 6 months, or 1 year, and it can be you can be paid or it can be without salary. So it depends on the negotiation that you have with the firm.
That's right.
So I was also like something interesting for me is new technologies. So like for instance, in my case, the Lego group, we just disclosed a collaboration that we will have with Epic Games to be in the metaverse. And now we're discussing in the Lego group like a policy for NFTs. So what does the future look like for IP? Like talking about metaverse, blockchain, NFTs. What can you tell us about that?
Why don't you start from the trademark copyright side, and then I can switch over to some of the other.
Okay, sure. I think that there were years there where people would consider in the U.S. that sort of the idea of intellectual property was almost synonymous with patents, and so as someone on the kind of trademark and copyright side, there was initially, in the say late 90s, a push to say like, no, wait, intellectual property is much broader than patents. It's not just patents. It encompasses many other things. I think we've just seen an explosion from there, where so many of the grand challenges that we face as a society, whatever if we're talking about, healthcare, our crises over the last few years, if we're talking about, the financial industry, if we're talking about new technologies emerging, there are IP issues that are central to so many of the issues that we face today, and so many of the more exciting things that we're dealing with in society. So certainly the metaverse is one of those, and NFTs come into that as part of it. We've seen the development of technology over time, and whether it's the advent of the internet, when we had all kinds of questions about like, what does this mean for, we need a whole new area of the law.
How are we enforcing our rights there?
This is going to be, yes,
Exactly.
A mass panic. And then we kind of realized, actually, we already have this kind of IP structure that undergirds so many of the new issues that are coming up. So I think in some ways, there's some aspects of NFTs that present some new, but in a lot of ways, what we're realizing as we see these emerging issues is that there are a lot of really good legal structures that we have in place, and that we can kind of draw on some of those, some of the past as we look toward the future.
Yeah, I think there are some areas that are somewhat transformational, and some areas that will be, where you can build upon. But so reflecting back on the internet, what the internet did with, say, music and copyright, transform things, how easy it is to copy files and copy music. And I'm sure you all went through that experience at some point, right? What will that mean for trademarks in the metaverse? Will it go through a similar transformation? What about the data rights that are associated with it? There are no good answers to these questions right now, right? And when we have these discussions internally in the law school, we also bring in these companies that are playing in those spaces. What you just said with Lego, Calvin Klein is also struggling with in terms of how to do, right? Apple's struggling with how to do those things.
It's new for everyone, right?
Exactly. So it's new for everybody. You work with the frameworks that you have. You recognize some things are going to change. And I can almost guarantee you, whatever we think the answer is today in 2022 won't be the answer in 5 years from now or 10 years from now. So I think what that really means is to have the underlying tools and skill set on how to think about it, how to approach it, how to address your issues today and transform those as the law evolves.
I think trademark licensing is a great example. I think when you're thinking about the metaverse, trademark licensing was not a particularly sexy or exciting area of trademark law for the last 20 or 30 years. But now when we look at things, the metaverse, all of a sudden trademark licensing is huge, and we're thinking about kind of upstream and downstream licensing, and what does it mean to have that kind of quality control, and user generated content adds a whole new layer. So I think that even some of these basic structures that we have in place, as we think about applying them in new contexts, things you see things from different angles, and those are all things that we're exploring both in our classes in IPSI, and then through some of the classes in the master's and the JD program as well.
And that's what's amazing of our career path. Like intellectual property always changes, and we'll always have something new to learn and to implement. So, but before we have to go again, what would be like the ABC? I mean, we watched the show. We watched the episode. We're really interested in attending Franklin Pierce. What should we do now?
Well, it's really exciting to be at that point, because it's at the level where people have so many options ahead of them, and I would say to really go to the link that we're posting.
We're posting
here.
The link, yes.
And through that you can learn about each one of the programs, and we have a phenomenal admissions team that can answer a lot of substantive questions. And our emails are also available on the website, so people can be in touch with us, directly, and we're happy to have a conversation, to answer any questions, and even just to think through logical, options of what might be best for you and your career goals in particular.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much. I think it was a pleasure to have both of them, and You always say that you're always invited if you want to come back.
Siempre están invitados a regresar y bueno, muchas gracias por vernos. Creo que puede ser una oferta educativa interesante para muchos de los miembros de la audiencia y cualquier cosa, bueno, los links y los correos electrónicos van a quedar en este episodio. Muchas gracias y nos vemos en la siguiente edición. Gracias, Arturo.
Gracias.
Gracias.
En este segundo programa concluimos con la oferta educativa de Franklin Pierce. Creo que es muy interesante para la audiencia, para jóvenes estudiantes, para practicantes, pero sobre todo tenemos la oportunidad de tener los siguientes pasos, ¿no? Los links y qué hacer en caso de estar interesados.